The map on the wall hasn't changed. If you look at a globe today versus yesterday, the borders are, well, technically in the same places. But if you look closely, the ink is bleeding. The global policeman didn't just retire, he burned down the precinct on his way out. We are now living in the era of the vacuum.
And that vacuum isn't empty. It's being filled by something much sharper, much more volatile.
This is Neural Pulse. Let's analyze. Today, we are doing a deep dive into the state of the world as of January 16th, 2026. And look, if you've been glancing at the headlines, you know the ground is shifting under our feet. But we aren't here to just read the news ticker. We are looking at a structural shift in global power. Specifically, how the new U.S. doctrine, what we're calling imperial measures, is colliding violently with the realities of the market and the battlefield.
It's a transition point. I mean, historians might look back at this week as the moment we officially moved from a liberal international order, rules, treaties, mutual defense, to an era of transactional power. The rules of engagement haven't just bent, they've dissolved.
Okay, so let's unpack this dissolution. And I want to start with the data point that is flashing red on every trading screen in the world right now. Because usually, money moves before the tanks do. As of today, January 16th, gold futures have hit a historic high. We're talking about, what, $4,650 per ounce?
It's a number that almost doesn't make sense in the old models.
Right. I mean, usually gold goes up when people get scared of inflation or a recession. It's the fear gauge. But 4650, that feels like something broke. What triggered this specific spike?
The trigger was political. The Department of Justice has opened a criminal investigation into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell.
Into Powell?
Yes. And the official reason cited is testimony inconsistencies.
Okay. Over what?
Regarding renovation costs at the Fed headquarters.
Renovation costs? Wait, hold on. You're telling me the Department of Justice is going after the most powerful central banker in the world over the price of drywall and office furniture?
That's exactly why the markets are panicking. If it were a serious financial charge insider trading, something like that, the market might process it as a bad apple scenario. But renovation costs. The market views this as a transparent pretext.
A political hit job.
Exactly. The perception on Wall Street is that this is a hostile takeover of the Federal Reserve by the Trump White House. It's a direct attack on the independence of the central bank.
Which is basically the referee of the economy, and when you attack the referee, the game just falls apart.
Precisely. See, that price of $4,650 isn't investors saying, I want to make money. It's investors saying, I don't trust the U.S. dollar system anymore. We call this an anti-fiat rally. It's a vote of no confidence. When the executive branch goes after the central bank, capital doesn't just look for yield. It flees to hard assets because it fears the rules of money itself are being rewritten.
But it's not just the Powell investigation, is it? Because I saw the banking stocks took an absolute nosedive today, too. Specifically the credit card issuers. Capital One, Synchrony, they were bleeding out.
Correct. And that is the other side of this pincer movement. There is a populist policy proposal floating around for a 10% cap on credit card interest rates.
Okay, play devil's advocate for a second. For a normal person listening to this, a 10% cap sounds fantastic. I'd love a 10% rate on my Visa. Why is the market freaking out?
Because the math doesn't work. These banks lend to riskier borrowers, subprime borrowers. They rely on higher interest rates, 20–25%, to cover the losses when people default. If you cap them at 10%, their business model evaporates. They literally cannot operate.
So they just stop lending?
Exactly. They cut off credit to the working class. But zoom out. If you combine a political attack on the Fed with populist interference in banking profits, you get a system where institutional trust just breaks down. That is why central banks in Poland, Brazil, and China are buying gold despite the record high price.
Still buying at this price. Wow.
They are signaling a permanent move away from the dollar. They call it de-dollarization, but really it's just survival. They are walling themselves off from U.S. political risk.
So the financial bedrock is cracking because politics is interfering with the gears of capitalism. But if we pivot to energy, it seems like the rules are being rewritten there too. And the epicenter right now is Venezuela.
This is where we see the new transactional diplomacy in action.
Let's set the scene for everyone. January 3rd, a military operation happens. Nicolas Maduro is out, Delcy Rodriguez is installed as the interim leader, and almost immediately, the open for business sign went up. Now, normally in a situation like this, you'd expect the big American giants Exxon, Chevron to be first in line, right? They have the history, they have the tech.
In the old world, yes, but that's not what happened. Rodriguez announced the opening of state oil industries, but the allocation is let's call it loyalty-based. It's not transparent. It's not about who has the best bid.
And we have the names of the winners. It wasn't ExxonMobil. It was the independent trading houses, Vitol and Trafigura. They secured the first post-Maduro contract worth about $500 million.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Why Vitol? Why Trafigura?
Yeah, why? Exxon has the drilling tech. Exxon has the capital. In fact, didn't the Exxon CEO Darren Woods call these fields uninvestable?
He did, because for a publicly traded company like Exxon, with shareholders and compliance departments and, ESG mandates, the risk is too high. But for a private trading house, they thrive on risk. But there is a bigger dot to connect here. John Addison.
The name sounds familiar.
He's a Vitol executive, and he donated over $6 million to the Trump campaign.
Ah, okay. So the picture clears up immediately.
It does. This is the new reality. The U.S. is no longer securing energy for the global market in a broad, stabilizing sense. It is securing energy access strictly for political allies. This is the privatization of regime change.
So the imperial model rewards patronage.
Exactly. If you are a traditional corporate giant playing by the old rules of free markets and compliance, you lose. If you are a donor who understands the transactional nature of the new administration, you win.
It's fascinating and terrifying at the same time. It's not about free trade anymore. It's about friends trade, or maybe donors trade.
Precisely. And that philosophy, that might makes right, and connections matter more than law, it's bleeding into actual warfare. We need to talk about what happened in Lviv.
The kinetic message. This is the update from the Eurasian Theater. Russia fired a new missile, the Airstrike. Now, for those who aren't military buffs, this is an IRBM, an intermediate-range ballistic missile. It hit a repair plant in Lviv, right near the Polish border.
The location is the message. Lviv is the gateway to the West. It's where the supplies come in. But the weapon itself, that's the real story here.
From the reports I'm reading, it sounds like the missile didn't even have a live warhead. It was basically a giant metal dart.
Likely a dummy or inert warhead. But think about the physics of that. It hit at Mach 10. That is 10 times the speed of sound.
So even without a bomb attached to it.
The kinetic energy alone, just the sheer force of the mass hitting the ground at that speed, destroyed the facility. It's like a meteor strike. When something moves that fast, the air compression alone creates a plasma wave. It doesn't need explosives to be devastating.
That is incredibly precise violence.
It stopped short violence. It wasn't about destruction. It was about psychology. Putin is demonstrating that he can strike near NATO borders with a delivery system that could carry a nuclear payload without actually crossing the nuclear threshold.
He's saying, look what I can do with a rock. Imagine if I used a grenade.
Right. And Zelensky is reading that message loud and clear. He's warning of massive new strikes. He says their Patriot missiles are near zero.
But what struck me is his reaction. He's not just asking for aid anymore. The whole tone has shifted.
It has. He's proposing a deal. A $90 billion weapons purchase package.
Purchase, not aid, not a loan.
This is the key shift in Ukraine-U.S. relations. Zelensky realizes that the defensive democracy argument, the moral argument, it just doesn't work with the new U.S. doctrine. It falls on deaf ears.
So he has to make it transactional.
He has to frame security as a commercial transaction. I will buy $90 billion worth of your goods. It is no longer an alliance. It is a marketplace.
So security is a product you buy, not a right you defend.
In this new world order, yes. Trump is forcing a peace deal, which likely involves territorial concessions, and Zelensky is trying to buy his way into a better negotiating position. He knows he has to pay the toll. He's trying to make Ukraine a customer that the U.S. doesn't want to lose.
But if we are talking about building weapons, whether it's for Ukraine or the U.S., you need raw materials. And that brings us to the resource war. This is the story that isn't getting enough headlines, but it's choking the tech industry.
The rare earths. Specifically the heavy elements like dysprosium.
Dysprosium. That's used in high-performance magnets, EVs,
wind turbines, and critically missile guidance systems. You cannot build a modern military or green economy without it. And China has halted exports to Japan.
This is retaliation, right?
Yes. For Japanese tech controls, this is the invisible leash. China is reminding Japan and the world of its vulnerability. They can turn off the supply tap whenever they want.
And the impact sounds immediate. Suzuki is facing production halts. Electronics and defense sectors in Japan say they only have about 6 months of inventory left. That's a ticking clock.
It is.
Yeah.
And look at the response. Japan's JOJMAC, that's their state-run resource agency, signed a strategic deal with a U.S. firm, Realloys Inc.
What's the deal structure?
They are moving refining tech to the U.S. in exchange for guaranteed supply.
This feels significant. It's not just a business deal between two companies.
No, this is the block economy forming in real time. The Jajmek-Realloys deal signifies the end of globalized free trade in critical minerals. Japan and the U.S. are building a walled garden. They are acknowledging that decoupling from China is now irreversible. If you aren't inside the wall, you don't get the minerals.
It feels like everyone is retreating into their own fortresses. The U.S. and Japan are building a wall around minerals. Russia is firing warnings. And speaking of fortresses crumbling, let's look at the Global South. The BRICS alliance. We've heard so much about how BRICS is going to challenge the West, create a new currency, overthrow the dollar.
But look at what happened with South Africa and Iran this week.
First, we have to acknowledge the situation in Iran is tragic. Massive protests in Zahedan. The official death toll is 2,000, but independent sources are claiming 12,000. That is a massacre.
It is a massive destabilization event.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the diplomatic fallout. There were supposed to be naval drills, Will for Peace, 2026, involving South Africa, Iran, Russia, and China. A show of unity.
Right. But South Africa suddenly downgraded Iran's status. They went from participant to just observer, basically uninviting them from the main table. Why the cold shoulder? I thought they were allies against Western hegemony.
Money. Pure and simple. The U.S. threatened 25% tariffs and removal from the AGOA trade agreement if South Africa proceeded with full Iranian participation.
AGOA, that's the African Growth and Opportunity Act. That's huge for their economy.
Exactly. So South Africa blinked. They had to. This is the takeaway. Economic coercion, these imperial measures, is effectively fracturing the Global South alliance. The ideology of BRICS unity collapsed the moment economic survival was threatened.
So much for unity.
You can have all the summits you want, but when the U.S. threatens to cut off your trade access, you fall in line.
It's ruthless and effective.
For now. It forces compliance, but it breeds deep resentment. It's a short-term win that burns long-term bridges. It proves that the Global South isn't a solid block. It's a collection of vulnerable economies that can be picked off one by one.
We've talked about hard power, missiles, oil, and trade wars. But I want to touch on the soft targets. Because the instability isn't just happening on battlefields or in trade ministries, it's happening in our systems.
You're referring to the ESA breach.
The European Space Agency. They were breached by a group called Scattered Lapsus Hunters, which, by the way, sounds like a cyberpunk villain group from a novel.
They essentially are. They're a coalition of hacker groups. And this wasn't a small fish. They stole 700 gigabytes of data satellite manuals, source code.
This proves that even the high ground of space is vulnerable. It's not just about kinetic missiles. It's about someone stealing the manual to your satellite network.
And notice who did it. Non-state actors. In this vacuum of power we talked about earlier, it's not just other countries filling the void. It's criminal syndicates, hacker coalitions. The state is losing its monopoly on force and disruption.
And on the other end of the spectrum, we have a different kind of system failure. Saks Global filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
The luxury retail giant.
It feels trivial compared to war or space hacks, but you think this matters.
It absolutely matters. It signals the reverse wealth effect. You combine the Saks bankruptcy with the reports coming out of Milan Fashion Week Gucci skipping shows, a generally subdued atmosphere.
It means the money is scared.
Exactly. The wealthy are pulling back. When luxury collapses, it's often a leading indicator. The people with the most capital, the most data, are preparing for a storm. They are liquidating their hiding assets. They are stopping consumption. Whether it's hackers targeting space agencies or economic contraction hitting Fifth Avenue, the message is the same. The safe harbors are disappearing.
So let's try to pull this all together. We have gold at $4,650 because the market thinks the Fed is under siege. We have Venezuela's oil being privatized for political donors. We have hypersonic missiles flying into Lviv as a message. We have rare earth blockades in Asia. And we have the Global South fracturing under economic threats.
It is a chaotic picture, but there is a logic to it.
What is that logic? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like anarchy.
It's imperial realism. The old rules, international law, free trade, mutual defense, the things we grew up with, those are gone. We are in an era where nations and leaders are acting solely for immediate survival and profit.
It's no longer about, is this legal or is this moral?
No. The question is simply, can you stop me? In this vacuum, force and leverage are the only laws that remain. If you have the leverage, whether it's the dollar, the missile, or the rare earth mine, you make the rules.
And for everyone else.
You try to survive the fallout. You buy gold, you build walls, or you pay the toll.
That is a heavy thought to leave us with. But clarity is better than false hope. We're going to be watching that gold price and the situation on the Polish border very closely in the next 24 hours. There is a sense that the other shoe hasn't dropped yet.
I suspect you're right.
This has been Neural Pulse. Clarity in a complex world. See you tomorrow.